Welcome to another edition of our Beyond the Numbers interview series, where we talk to top Valley leaders about what advice they would have for themselves if they could go back and why they love accounting. Today, we're speaking with Austin Morse. He is an internal audit manager at Zillow. I was excited to have Austin because he is one of our risk auditors, and he actually likes internal audit, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Are you ready to get going, Austin?
Let's do it.
If you could go back to when you were that staff or senior accountant, what advice would you give yourself?
When you gave me this question, I thought of like the advice everyone gives, which I'll give first, which is, everyone says be a sponge, and they're totally right. Be a sponge. It's your first adult job probably, and you don't really know how business works or really anything. So be a sponge, but I tack onto that, be a sponge for the industries that you get to be a part of. I had in my 3 years of public accounting before I went into industry, I had over 19 clients, like 19 or 20. And there's only two reasons you have that many clients. You're either very bad at your job and people just keep tossing you around, or you're very good. I hope that I'm the latter and not the former. But I got to work in every industry, like manufacturing, retail, banking, tech, aeronautics, mining. And I got to do this, but I would give the advice that try to be a sponge of those industries, like learn how those businesses work. You are getting such an intimate view of how companies operate. You get to look at everything in internal audit, and you have a unique opportunity to learn how a business operates. And when you can do that across all sectors, now that I'm in industry, people all the time look to me as a subject matter expert on like best practices for businesses. And when I'm able to say, oh, well, when my client Carvana was doing this, or when my client GoDaddy was doing that, this is how they operated and how it was different and why it was tailored for their businesses. And people always are just like, wow, that's amazing. Because most people, when they start their career, are just in one industry. If you start in tech, you're going to stay in tech. If you start in, soybeans, you're going to probably stay in agriculture. So they don't get as broad a horizon as you do. So take advantage of it and just become a sponge of how businesses operate. And you know what? Like, I don't want to say like in your free time, because you don't have that much free time. But if you could absorb even an extra 15% of like the tertiary stuff, you might not even understand any of it. But I notice, looking back now, something I learned 5 years ago, it clicks all of a sudden. I'm like, oh, I remember reading about that in like their 10K, or I remember learning about that in an inventory control I was testing. And I didn't really get the control back then, but I get it now.
Okay.
And that's exactly just try to learn and be a sponge for the industries, not just how you do your job.
Okay, that's great. That's great. And you wrapped it up there for us. So moving on to the next question. Why do you love accounting?
I love accounting because it kind of plays into that. I get to learn how businesses operate. And I think a lot of people who go into accounting are type A, and they have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, because most entrepreneurs are pretty type A. And I've known plenty of people in public accounting and internal audit, specifically internal audit, who have grown on to become entrepreneurs. And the reason why is you get to learn how a business operates in all facets. And that is such a fun position for you, because if you, let's say you go into finance or financial modeling, that's all you're doing. It's just plugging in, understanding how the business is going to grow, what the forecast is going to be. Internal audit, I get to learn what that is, plus how to manage inventory, plus how we pay our vendors, how do we select our vendors, everything. It's such a fun job, because you also get to do, I call it our podcast season. Internal audit, you have to host walkthroughs every year for 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, or even for operational audits. And I always joke, I'm a Gen Zer, and like every Gen Zer at one point is like, I want to start a podcast one day. This is my podcast. I don't ever have to think about that, because I, for 3 months, get to talk with like the director of accounts payable or the director of inventory management and be like, so Jeff, how do you do your job? And I get to do follow-up questions with them. I get to learn exactly how they do their jobs. You get to develop that interview skill as well. It's just a really interactive job where you get to learn how businesses function.
Okay, so let's just pretend I'm a senior in college, and I'm trying to decide between, okay, I'm going to go be a GL accountant, and everything I hear is about GL accountant. How would you describe to me what I would do as an internal auditor? What would my work look like if I did?
That was my first job, was a GL accountant, and I did it for a year. I did it for a year, and I was like, I can't do this. It's because it's very repetitive. Okay. An internal auditor, it's pretty straightforward. If we were just talking, most internal auditors, if you're at a public company, you're going to do SOX, which is the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 testing, where you have to make sure that there are internal controls over anything that can materially affect the financial statements. So internal controls, if in case someone has no clue what that is just, a rule set that says, hey, you have to have certain processes that ensure that anything that affects the financial statements is done correctly. A simple one is you have to have someone review the financial statements before they're filed. Easy one. But the way it works is that you start off the year with your risk assessment. You go through whether it's the financial statements, whether it's the footnotes, which are in the financial statements. You do expense line testing, and you're checking to see what the materiality of all the different financial statement line items is, and you determine what you would consider material. And that's how you kind of determine, okay, this is what we're going to look at for our audit. From there, you start doing planning sessions typically, where if there are controls already in place, you're going to go, okay, how's everything looking, guys? Let's do like a check-in call, see, and you're not testing anything. And then you get into the walkthrough season, which was that podcast season. You're asking control owners, hey, send me documentation over this control. And then you meet with them, like how we're doing right now. I have them share my screen or their screen, and then we walk through their process of how they perform the different controls. You then document it, and then you either send it on to your external auditors, or it goes through review internally with your team. And then once you've tested all the controls, you kind of finalize the audit and you're done for the year. Operational audits are kind of just like that, except instead of having controls, what you're doing is you've been given a scope of work. So let's say they're like, hey, we're losing money in this particular revenue line. Can you help us figure out how to do it? That's more of like the white space idea, where it's like, okay, Austin knows how business works really well. So let's see whether he can go in and figure out why we're losing money. But same type of idea. I'll do a risk assessment. I'll have walkthroughs. I'll test what the entire process is, and then I'll come up with my conclusion.
Okay. And for that, are you like putting processes in place, then helping them like fix all the problem?
Yep, that's exactly. Yeah. So if there's issues or deficiencies, what I'll do is I'll give them a suggested remediation plan. So let's say the problem is, well, the reason why we're losing money is our billing system isn't communicating properly with Salesforce, where we're booking all of the clients. What I would do is I'd suggest, hey, listen, maybe you guys need to create an API where it's able to do a direct pull. Or maybe I'll say, you guys don't want to do an API, you got to reconcile the data back and forth to make sure it's complete and accurate. That way, you're billing everything properly. But again, it's kind of the best part about this job is it gets so much easier as time goes on. I tell people, do not get discouraged your first year. You don't know anything. But now I'm about 6 years, a little over 6 years in, and now I can look at a process and go, oh, I already have 3 solutions possibly for it. And it's so much easier now.
Okay. Because you're probably running across more different things in audit than you would, an internal audit than you would as like a GL accountant or even as a financial auditor, external auditor.
100%. Yeah, definitely. Internal audit, people are willing to share with you things that they would never tell their external auditor. And I never started an external audit. I started right in internal audit in public accounting. And even then, people were more apt to share with us because they know you're there to help them. You're not there to just ding them on anything.
Okay. And you said you started your career, I think you said, or you, if I remember from your LinkedIn profile, you started at Meritage?
I started at Meritage Homes as a general ledger accountant, and then I went to KPMG and I did internal audit and enterprise risk with them for 3 years. And then I went to Coca-Cola for their internal audit program, and then I came to Zillow for the last almost 2 years.
And you would say internal audit is the way to go?
100%. I mean, the only way I would tell someone not to go internal audit if they were interested in accounting is if they liked more like repetitive, what I consider mundane work. It's super valuable work. I'm so glad there are people who want to be general ledger accountants because I could not do it. But internal audit is for you want to constantly be learning. You like being able to learn how processes work. You like talking to people. You don't want to just be at your desk all day, in Excel.
Right. You guys are like the hidden little departments out there.
Yeah. People always joke. Whenever they talk to me, they're like, Austin, how did you end up as an accountant? You don't seem like the kind of guy that would be an accountant. And I'm like, I never realized it either. I got into it. I had a partner at KPMG who was able to bring me in and convince me to switch my major, but I was like, man, what am I doing? But no, it's great. I mean, it's a total secret that internal auditors are pretty social folk who like talking to people and getting to know how they do their jobs.
Right. So before we wrap up today, is there any other piece of advice you would want to give somebody at that staff and senior level, maybe if they're looking to get promoted? Do you have any advice on how to get promoted?
Definitely. I would say don't focus on one thing. Don't focus on just being the top producer. Don't focus on just overworking yourself. Don't focus on just, kissing butt and going every happy hour. Try to be as well-rounded of a person as you can. There's right now a shortage of accountants, but they're not going to promote you just because they're a shortage. They need people who are competent, who know what they're doing. So learn how the job works as well. I see so many people who want that senior promotion and all they do is just overwork themselves, but they just couldn't tell me how the business works. So like I said earlier, take the opportunity to not just learn how to do your job, but how your business works as well. So be well-rounded.
Okay, that's great advice. All right, Austin, we appreciate your time today. We appreciate everybody taking the time to watch, and stay tuned for another edition coming out next week. Thank you.